Stars are the crystallization of life, but what exactly does that mean? We know the primordial crucible is where all life originates, so what does that infer of the stars and the life therein? Well, I would posit that the stars are in fact the crystallization of consciousness itself, and that all of consciousness originates from the stars. That if the primordial crucible is where organic material originates, then the primeval current is much of the same function, but is instead where all of consciousness or souls originate. We see this for one in the simple fact that it's the intelligence stat that allows us to use glintstone magic, almost like peering into the veil of consciousness and channeling its energy as a source of power. Sunland provides us with a lot of evidence regarding this theory, mostly with her primal glintstone, which is quite literally the crystallization of her consciousness and being. Even in another body, as long as it's applied her primal glintstone, her soul can still prevail. This would infer that when Lusat and Azur peered into the primeval current, what they actually saw was the culmination or current of every soul that ever was or what will be. I draw emphasis on the word current because there is a recurrent imagery of water or the ocean/sea when it comes to Elden Ring's exploration of the souls or spirits, and space as well. So, the primeval current may very well be a metaphysical current through which all souls naturally float in and out of space-time. If all of consciousness has a natural flow of progression through the deep sea of space, it would then only make sense that these streams of consciousness spiral into pools of energy, crystallizing then into the stars observed and studied by the ancient astrologers. Almost like the concept of chakras in Eastern religions, spiraling pools of energy in which our chi passes through as it travels the body and its pathways. And again, in many occasions, explorations of spirits are done through sorceries, or other such things that scale off in. The regal ancestral spirit itself does magic damage, and the bows its worshippers use scale off intelligence. The death sorceries, though also channeling some level of faith, likely due to its relation to a specific outer god, still mostly require intelligence. Peering back into Lusat and Azur, it would then make sense as to how they went mad, for lack of a better term, as they would have themselves peered into the stream through which all consciousness flows. This would have no doubt for sorcerers who were still but petty human bodies, overwhelmed those senses and capacities of comprehension. Not only that, but it would appear that their communion with the current has altered their bodies, almost like they themselves are becoming stars, or vessels of souls that crystallize in the glintstone. A very possible unintended consequence/side effect of having glimpsed into it. Again, if stars are pools of collective souls, this would also explain our graven schools, faulty attempts at creating stars through the sacrifice of its overzealous purveyors. Indeed, we find sorcerers who have forsaken their bodies, seemingly combining it with others to bring together their souls. Perhaps they mistakenly thought that, much like any celestial body, their false star would have some level of gravitational pull, attracting further souls to it, and expanding its mass into that of a proper celestial body. And it seems they were very mistaken. Or were they? Let's now draw to the obvious facts on our faces, the existence of stars in reference to the outer gods, and its relation to the principles we've established. For one, our golden star, presumably either the Elden beast or the Elden ring. If the pulling together of souls or consciousness is what creates a star, then why wouldn't the graven schools work? I mean, in theory, it's much the same principle, right? Perhaps it's not that the idea itself was so foolish, but that the methods were not pushed to its logical extreme. A true mass collection of souls, done not through the conscious act of merging the bodies of a few students, but instead through the mass sacrifice of a much larger grouping. A population of citizens so condemned by a single individual that it was through this sacrifice that a god would call to her and make her its vessel. Queen Marika, her Elden ring, and the genocide of the Hornsent race. Now, we don't actually know for certain if Marika's mass sacrifice at the Divine Gate was in fact the genocide Mesmer performed on the Hornsent. It's very much possible, to be honest, that Marika performed this ritual only at the sacrifice of a relatively small portion of the population, leaving the rest under her rule, only for her to finish a job at a later date. The timeline is a bit vague, so this is still up for debate. But regardless, the quantity of souls condemned was more than enough for Mariko to ascend and ascertain the Elden Ring, which seems to me what the Golden Star refers to. The ritual, which was then followed by the creation of the Erd Tree, conveys to us the purpose of the tree, as a new nexus through which souls could be channeled. To elaborate, when a body dies, the soul continues to travel, such as how Ronnie was able to guide her soul into a vessel puppet, one that would render her free from the manipulation of the greater will, or Ruli Metzir. Ronnie, with her vast intelligence and thus awareness of the spirit and how it functions, managed to find a way to prevent her soul from returning to the Erd Tree and instead leave it in her own hands. And it is for that purpose she needed the Rune of Death in the Curse Mark ritual. The Erd Tree, as we're told throughout the game on several occasions, has seemingly compromised whatever pathways of death or spirit travel that came before it, and become the soul nexus to which souls travel to and reincarnate from. The Erd Tree has compromised the order of the stars in favor of its own for its own benefit, whatever that may be. We also have to consider, with these implications, why exactly stars are so closely related to fate. Well, again, it was my original argument that the travel of souls is throughout space-time itself, not just space in the open cosmos. That is to say that the fate of a soul and its choices are written in the stars themselves. What the astrologers were studying is the constellations, the current through which souls flow and then congregate. This is mostly conjecture on my part, but I imagine that to peer into the stars would allow one glimpses of their own soul, and thus receive memories or visions of what is to be, as the soul is something that transcends space-time, traveling the cosmos while simultaneously inhabiting its own body. I say this because space and time are not so separate as elements, but instead two interconnected forces of a natural world that reflect each other. The greater the pull of a force, the more time bends alongside said pull. But how exactly does the Erd Tree compromise the mode of spirit? Well, let's recap shortly. Before the Erd Tree, the line between life and death was a lot more blurred. It was common for spirits to continue traveling even after death, becoming those who live in death. It was only after the spawn of the Erd Tree that such travel became heretical. However, it was not so much that the Erd Tree condemned spirits, but that it existed as something before them. As Roderica calls it, an immortal essence. She tells us that immortal essence is allowed to, under the Erd Tree, exist in the form of spirit, which would explain the existence of spirit ashes. At least in some point in time it was. But again, the Erd Tree would become the central nexus of death through which most souls would return to. And as to how? Well, I would say through the existence of runes. This is mostly speculation now, but I believe that runes are the primary method to which spirits are broken down and repurposed. All runes exist under the Golden Order. As I covered in my last theory video, they can manifest from individual beings. Melina uses them to manifest your thoughts and ambitions into personal power. Elements of your soul becoming repurposed and reused by others. Observe also how, when dropped, our runes take the form of a small tree. It must be that, in its own form, spirit can only be channeled and released through glintstone. It cannot physically alter the properties of its user, at least not until it's converted into runes, which the Erd Tree does for us. Only then can a Finger Maiden channel that power into a human being, and that human, our Tarnish, himself becomes a nexus of his own.